The Imperial fleet arrived above Earth without fanfare, because civilizations that considered themselves eternal did not believe they needed theatrics. Space simply tore open above the orbit of Neptune, and 200 black war carriers emerged in perfect geometric silence. No wasted movement. No scattered formation drift. Every vessel positioned itself with mathematical precision around the solar system like pieces locking into place on a board humanity had never been invited to play on. Then came the transmission. It appeared simultaneously on every military channel, civilian network, satellite feed, and emergency broadcast system on Earth. The voice was calm, translated instantly into every known human language by machines sophisticated enough to predict speech patterns before they were fully spoken. By order of the Sovereign Dominion, the species designated human is found in violation of technological containment accords. Surrender all unauthorized military developments immediately. Compliance will preserve population continuity. Population continuity, not survival, not peace. Continuity. That single phrase chilled the planet more than the fleet itself. Inside the Arctic defense vault buried 3 miles beneath ancient ice, Commander Elias Ward watched the message replay across the central holodisplay while warning sirens pulsed red through the bunker walls. Around him, hundreds of technicians moved with rehearsed urgency, yet none of them looked surprised. Fear existed in the room, but panic did not. That was the detail the Dominion would later realize should have terrified them first. Because humanity had known this moment was coming. For 32 years, Earth had pretended to obey. They had attended diplomatic summits, signed compliance treaties, allowed Dominion observers inside orbital shipyards, publicly dismantled experimental weapons programs while smiling for alien cameras and thanking the Empire for its guidance. Humanity had played the role of the grateful primitive species so convincingly that entire Dominion intelligence divisions had classified Earth as strategically harmless. But harmless civilizations did not bury reactors beneath glaciers. Harmless civilizations did not hide entire laboratories inside extinct volcanoes. And harmless civilizations certainly did not spend 3 decades building a warship nobody was supposed to see. The massive blast doors beneath the Arctic base began to open with a thunderous groan that shook frost from the ceiling. Thousands of feet above them, the frozen ocean cracked apart in a perfect black line stretching across the ice shelf. Then something enormous started rising from beneath the Arctic Ocean. At first, Dominion surveillance interpreted it as tectonic activity. Then the object broke through the ice completely, and every tactical system across the invading fleet suddenly flagged the same impossible anomaly. The vessel was ugly. That was the first thing High Strategist Vaylor noticed from the bridge of the Dominion flagship ascendancy. The human ship violated nearly every known principle of advanced starship architecture. This hull was asymmetrical. Entire sections looked unfinished. External weapon housings protruded from the surface without concealment or aerodynamic smoothing. There were visible armor scars across its frame as though it had survived battles that had never happened. It looked less like a ship and more like a weapon someone had forced into the shape of one. "What is its classification?" Vaylor asked quietly. No one answered immediately, because Dominion databases had no match. The vessel continued rising through the shattered ice until its full silhouette became visible against Earth's northern atmosphere. It dwarfed every human ship ever recorded. Long enough to cast shadows over glaciers. Dark enough to seem carved from the void itself. Then the impossible happened. One of the oldest officers on the ascendancy stumbled backward in visible fear. Archivist San, a historian who had served the Dominion for over 2 centuries, stared at the human vessel with widening eyes and suddenly whispered something no one on the bridge understood. "That design!" The old alien's voice trembled. "I've seen that design before." Every officer turned toward him. That configuration was erased from military history archives 12,000 years ago. Silence swallowed the bridge. Vaylor slowly looked back toward the human warship now hovering above Earth's atmosphere. For the first time since entering the solar system, uncertainty entered the room. Then the human vessel transmitted a signal directly into every Dominion command network. Not a threat. Not a negotiation. Just a single sentence spoken by a calm human voice. You should have destroyed us before we learned why you fear your own history. And deep inside the Dominion flagship, sealed systems that had not activated since the oldest galactic wars suddenly came online by themselves. For 11 full seconds after the transmission ended, nobody aboard the Dominion flagship spoke. The silence was not confusion alone. Dominion officers were trained from birth to process fear chemically, to compartmentalize uncertainty before it became contagious. Entire branches of their civilization had evolved around emotional suppression after the collapse wars nearly annihilated them thousands of years earlier. Fear was considered primitive. Panic was considered contagious weakness. And yet the bridge of the ascendancy felt infected. High Strategist Valor watched warning glyphs spread across tactical displays as dormant archival systems continued waking without authorization. Ancient military classifications were unlocking themselves deep inside sealed Dominion databases. Files so old that most younger officers had believed they were ceremonial relics rather than active security layers. The human ship had triggered them simply by existing. That is impossible, one systems officer whispered. Those archives require direct High Council authorization. No, Archivist San replied quietly, his pale fingers trembling against the console. Those archives require pattern recognition. The old historian could not pull his eyes away from the human vessel hanging over Earth's atmosphere like a dark blade suspended above the world. The asymmetry of the hull, the exposed spinal structure, the rotating external weapon rings. None of it matched modern engineering philosophy, because it had not been designed according to modern philosophy. It had been designed according to fear. Valor turned sharply toward him. Explain. Sen hesitated. That hesitation alone disturbed the bridge more than any alarm. 12,000 years earlier, long before the sovereign dominion united the galaxy beneath centralized order, there had been another civilization powerful enough to threaten interstellar stability. Not an empire built on expansion or conquest, but on adaptation. Their fleets ignored accepted doctrine. Their weapons evolved mid-conflict. They specialized in studying superior enemies until superiority itself became exploitable. The ancient records called them the variants. No surviving images existed because the Dominion had erased nearly everything after the war ended. Officially, the variants had gone extinct. Unofficially, entire military academies were built around the lessons their existence had taught the galaxy. Never allow adaptive civilizations unrestricted growth. Never permit asymmetrical military innovation. And above all else, never let unpredictable species survive long enough to study you. Valor felt something cold settle into his chest. You believe humanity discovered variant doctrine? Sen swallowed hard. No, strategist. His eyes remained fixed on the screen. I believe humanity rediscovered it independently. Across Earth, panic spread faster than information. Cities descended into controlled chaos as civilians flooded emergency shelters, while military satellites tracked the Dominion Armada, tightening formation around the solar system. Financial systems froze. Orbital elevators halted. Entire religions declared the arrival of Judgment Day within hours. Yet beneath the fear, another emotion was beginning to emerge. Confusion. Because Earth's governments were not behaving like governments facing extinction. There were no emergency surrender negotiations. No evacuation attempts. No desperate global addresses promising peace. Instead, encrypted military traffic exploded across hidden channels so rapidly that even Dominion intelligence struggled to keep pace. Dormant launch facilities activated beneath deserts. Arctic communication arrays powered online after decades of apparent abandonment. Deep-sea cargo platforms began moving toward classified coordinates in the Pacific. Humanity was not preparing to survive. Humanity was preparing for something else. Inside the Arctic vessel now identified only by the impossible designation Nemesis-class prototype, Commander Elias Ward moved through narrow steel corridors vibrating with the hum of awakening systems. The ship did not resemble Dominion architecture because it had never been built for comfort or symbolism. Every corridor was functional. Every surface reinforced. The air itself smelled faintly metallic, like machinery overheating just below acceptable limits. The ship felt alive in the worst possible way. Around him, crew members strapped into combat stations, while technicians monitored reactor instability, climbing far above safe thresholds. Nobody aboard looked reassured by the ship they had built. Most looked afraid of it. That detail mattered. Humanity did not trust the prototype completely. Ward entered the central command chamber where dozens of holographic tactical projections surrounded Admiral Sophia Reyes, the architect of the entire project. She had aged 20 years over the course of its construction. Her hair had gone silver before 50. Half the officers in the room viewed her with admiration. The other half viewed her as the woman who might accidentally doom the species. The fleet is compressing inward, Ward reported. They're preparing containment positioning. Reyes nodded calmly. Good. That answer unsettled him more than the invasion fleet. You expected this formation? I designed for it. She enlarged the tactical projection with one movement. Hundreds of Dominion ships glowed red around the solar system in mathematically perfect attack symmetry. Every empire eventually becomes predictable, she said quietly, especially one that hasn't truly lost a war in thousands of years. Ward studied the enemy formation. You sound almost disappointed. Reyes finally looked at him. Commander, if they had approached differently, we would already be dead. Before he could answer, alarms erupted across the command chamber. A Dominion strike formation had detached from the main fleet. 48 destroyers accelerating directly toward Earth. The first wave. Across the solar system, Dominion commanders expected resistance but limited resistance. Primitive civilizations often lashed out emotionally when cornered. The purpose of overwhelming force was psychological collapse before escalation became necessary. Destroy enough orbital infrastructure. Cripple command coordination. Force surrender. The operation had been modeled thousands of times. What Dominion analysts had not modeled was a human response measured in silence. No defensive fleet launched to intercept. No missiles fired from Earth. No visible reaction at all. The 48 destroyers crossed lunar orbit uncontested. Then one of them vanished. Not exploded. Not disabled. Vanished. Its signal disappeared so completely that Dominion sensors briefly treated it as a telemetry malfunction. Then a second destroyer disappeared. Then a third. No debris field. No weapon discharge. Nothing. The entire strike formation slowed instinctively. Inside the Ascendancy, tactical officers scrambled to explain the anomaly while long-range scans searched desperately for hidden weapon signatures. There were none, which made the next discovery infinitely worse. The missing ships had not been destroyed. They had moved. Every vanished vessel suddenly reappeared over 2 million kilometers away. Dead in space, rotated backward, with every crew member aboard biologically intact but unconscious. No known Dominion technology could accomplish that. No known physics should have allowed it. And deep beneath the Arctic ice, inside the prototype ship humanity had spent 32 years hiding from the galaxy, Admiral Sophia Reyes finally whispered the words that made every officer in the command chamber understand how dangerous the next few hours were about to become. Now they're paying attention. The Dominion fleet stopped advancing. That single decision sent a shockwave through every military analyst on Earth because empires like the Sovereign Dominion did not pause once superiority had been established. Their entire doctrine depended on momentum. Speed created intimidation. Intimidation created surrender. Surrender preserved order. For nearly 3,000 years, the sequence had remained unbroken. But now 200 warships hovered motionless beyond lunar orbit while confused commanders tried to understand how 48 destroyers had been displaced across millions of kilometers without visible force. And the longer the silence lasted, the more dangerous it became. Inside the Ascendancy, High Strategist Valor stood before a tactical projection that no longer resembled certainty. Data streams overlapped in chaotic layers as Dominion analysts attempted to reconstruct the impossible event from fragmented sensor echoes. The displaced destroyers remained inactive, their crews alive but neurologically compromised as though their brains had experienced simultaneous temporal desynchronization. No physical trauma. No radiation exposure. No invasive biological agents. The crews had simply stopped functioning correctly. They are not attacking us conventionally, Valor said quietly. No, Archivist Sen replied. They are attacking assumptions. That answer unsettled him because it was true. The Dominion had spent centuries perfecting defensive systems against energy weapons, kinetic bombardment, cyber warfare, biological corruption, and gravitational destabilization. Every known threat possessed identifiable patterns. Humanity's prototype possessed none. It behaved like an unanswered question. On Earth, global broadcasts showed the Dominion fleet hanging above the solar system in eerie stillness, while governments struggled to maintain public order. Yet something unexpected was happening beneath the panic. The longer humanity survived without collapsing, the more civilian fear began transforming into fascination. People started watching. Entire cities gathered around public screens not to witness defeat, but to understand why the galaxy's greatest empire suddenly looked uncertain. That shift frightened Dominion intelligence more than human weapons. Because fear maintained control, curiosity destroyed it. Inside the Nemesis-class prototype, Commander Elias Ward moved through the lower reactor levels where engineers fought to stabilize systems that should not have been functioning simultaneously. The ship's core pulsed with violent blue light behind containment walls thick enough to survive direct orbital bombardment. Even through reinforced glass, the energy looked wrong. Not unstable exactly. Hungry. Chief Engineer Naomi Volkov stood surrounded by failing diagnostics. Grease smeared across her sleeves while warning indicators flashed around her like red rain. You're pushing the displacement lattice too hard, Ward warned. Volkov laughed once without humor. This ship was born pushed too hard. She adjusted a containment field manually while temperatures continued climbing. The reactors weren't designed for prolonged activation cycles because nobody expected the damn thing to survive first contact. Ward studied the glowing core carefully. Then why build it? Volkov finally looked at him. Because the Dominion made the same mistake every empire makes. And that is, they believed technological superiority means understanding. Before Ward could respond, the ship-wide intercom activated. Command staff to tactical immediately. The tone in Admiral Rhea's voice carried something new. Not fear. Anticipation. By the time Ward reached the command chamber, the tactical displays had changed completely. The Dominion fleet was reorganizing. Not retreating. Learning. Smaller formations detached from the main armada, spreading across multiple vectors while dozens of sleek reconnaissance vessels accelerated toward the outer edges of the solar system. Valor had abandoned intimidation doctrine entirely. He was adapting battlefield structure to minimize systemic vulnerability. Humanity had succeeded in forcing the Dominion to think defensively. That was fast, Ward muttered. Reyes nodded slowly. The dangerous ones always adapt after the first shock. She zoomed the tactical projection inward. They're isolating observational ranges, decentralizing command synchronization, reducing shared targeting architecture. Ward frowned. Meaning they realized the prototype isn't destroying fleets. Her eyes narrowed slightly. It's infecting coordination. That realization changed everything. The Nemesis class had not been designed as the strongest ship humanity could build. Strength alone would never bridge the technological gap between Earth and a civilization thousands of years older. Instead, humanity had spent decades studying the psychological consequences of perfect systems. Dominion warfare depended on synchronization. Every ship shared targeting solutions. Every fleet shared predictive combat models. Every commander trusted the collective intelligence of the whole. Humanity had built a ship designed to poison that trust. The displacement event had not simply disabled enemy destroyers. It had introduced uncertainty into the Dominion's operational psychology. Suddenly, every tactical assumption required verification. Every command carried hesitation. Every system demanded doubt. And doubt spread faster than fire. Across the Dominion fleet, officers began questioning targeting data. Sensor anomalies triggered unnecessary evasive maneuvers. Entire formations slowed because captains no longer trusted shared navigational predictions fully. Some crews even requested manual firing authorization rather than automated synchronization. The Empire remained overwhelmingly powerful. But for the first time in centuries, it no longer felt invincible. Then the first human casualty report arrived. A hidden monitoring station near Saturn had been discovered and destroyed by Dominion scouts. 400 personnel killed instantly. 3 more deep space facilities went dark minutes later. The Dominion was learning quickly. They'll start hunting infrastructure now, Reyes said. Observation arrays, relay stations, supply networks. They'll dissect the system piece by piece until they understand the framework. Ward looked at the tactical spread. Can they? Reyes remained silent for several seconds. Then she answered honestly. Yes. That honesty changed the atmosphere in the room. Until now, many officers aboard the prototype had secretly believed the ship might actually be unstoppable. Watching the Dominion hesitate had awakened dangerous hope. But Reyes understood something the others did not. The prototype was buying time, not winning. And time was becoming expensive. Suddenly another alert erupted across the command chamber. Long-range sensors detected movement beneath the Dominion flagship itself. Massive movement. At first, analysts assumed additional destroyers were deploying. Then the signatures resolved fully, and silence swept across the room. The objects emerging from beneath the Ascendancy were not ships. They were autonomous warforms. Gigantic biomechanical constructs unlike anything previously recorded in human databases. Hundreds of them unfolded into space like metallic predators awakening from hibernation, each one larger than a cruiser and moving without conventional propulsion signatures. Ward stared at the display. What are those? Even Reyes looked disturbed now. Something they didn't want to use. The warforms accelerated forward with terrifying speed, ignoring conventional formation patterns entirely. No synchronized structure. No predictable movement. No centralized targeting behavior. Humanity had forced the Dominion to abandon machine-perfect coordination. So now the Empire was sending something worse. Something designed to think like predators instead of soldiers. And as the first warform opened itself like a blooming mechanical nightmare, revealing rows of rotating singularity cannons inside its body, Dominion Command transmitted a new message across every frequency in the solar system. You wish to fight without rules, Vaylor's voice said coldly. So be it. The first warform reached Jupiter's outer orbit in less than 9 minutes. That alone should have been impossible. Even Dominion strike vessels required carefully calculated acceleration windows to avoid tearing themselves apart under extreme inertial stress. But the biomechanical constructs ignored every known limitation. They moved like living thoughts rather than engineered machines, twisting through vacuum with violent directional shifts no organic pilot could survive. And worse, they learned while moving. Every evasive maneuver performed by the Nemesis prototype was analyzed in real time. Every targeting disruption humanity deployed against the Dominion fleet adapted more slowly against the warforms. They did not depend on synchronized combat architecture. They hunted independently. Humanity had spent 32 years designing weapons against order. The Dominion had just unleashed chaos. Inside the tactical chamber of the Nemesis, alarms echoed nonstop while crimson projections tracked 36 warforms accelerating inward from multiple vectors. They're bypassing the defense lattice, an officer shouted. The predictive desynchronization isn't holding. Because there's almost nothing to desynchronize, Reyes replied sharply. Her fingers moved rapidly across holographic controls while new tactical simulations unfolded around the chamber. Unlike Dominion fleets, the warforms shared only fragments of information with one another. Minimal coordination. Minimal dependency. They operated like apex predators competing inside the same hunting territory rather than soldiers obeying hierarchy. Humanity's greatest advantage had just been partially neutralized. Commander Ward studied the incoming trajectories. Then we hit them directly. That's what they want. Reyes expanded one of the warforms on the main display. The construct resembled a skeletal sea creature forged from black alloy, its rotating internal structures shifting constantly to conceal vulnerable points. Look at the armor distribution. Ward's eyes narrowed. The thing was rearranging itself during movement. Sections of its frame hardened adaptively whenever targeting systems focused on them. Weapon signatures shifted frequencies before lock completion. Heat emissions redistributed through rotating internal organs. The warforms were evolving mid-engagement. One of the younger tactical officers finally whispered what everyone else was already thinking. How long has the Dominion had these? No one answered, because the real question was worse. Why had they hidden them? Then Earth's outer defense network disappeared from the tactical map. Not gradually, instantly. 14 hidden weapons platforms positioned beyond Mars went dark simultaneously. A second later, the transmission delay caught up and horrifying visual feeds flooded command displays. The warforms had torn through the installations with terrifying efficiency, ignoring defensive casualties entirely while ripping open armored stations using gravitational shear weapons mounted inside their limbs. Human crews died by the thousands in under a minute. The room fell silent except for warning alarms. Ward stared at the destruction unfolding across the displays. Those stations had been classified beyond top secret. Some had operated in isolation for decades, preparing for a war nobody believed would actually happen. And the Dominion was erasing them effortlessly. Reyes looked almost calm. That frightened him more than panic would have. They found the hidden network too quickly, Ward said carefully. Yes. You expected better resistance. I expected them to need longer. The subtle difference between those statements settled heavily over the room. Reyes had never believed humanity would avoid losses. She had simply hoped the Dominion would bleed more slowly. Another alert erupted. Deep space reconnaissance arrays near Saturn detected additional Dominion signatures entering the solar system. Not reinforcements exactly. Infrastructure vessels. Construction carriers. Resource harvesters. The Empire was preparing for prolonged occupation. They think they've stabilized the battlefield, Reyes murmured. Ward turned toward her sharply. Have they? Instead of answering directly, she activated a classified tactical layer only senior command staff could view. Suddenly dozens of hidden markers illuminated across the solar system. Ward felt his stomach tighten. Asteroid mining facilities. Civilian cargo stations. Abandoned research colonies. Frozen listening posts. For decades humanity had hidden military infrastructure inside ordinary industrial expansion. Entire sections of the solar system were not what they appeared to be. They mapped our visible defenses, Reyes said quietly. Not the real ones. Before Ward could respond, the prototype itself shuddered violently. One of the warforms had reached firing range. The impact struck like a planetary collision. Warning lights exploded across the command deck while the ship's gravity fluctuated hard enough to throw crew members sideways. The Nemesis groaned beneath the stress as internal bulkheads sealed automatically around damaged compartments. Report. Forward armor compromised. Shield lattice destabilizing. Multiple hull breaches on decks 11 through 14. Ward steadied himself against the tactical console while another strike slammed into the ship. Unlike Dominion fleet weapons, the warform's attack did not behave predictably. The Singularity cannon distorted localized gravity around impact zones, causing portions of the hull to collapse inward before rebounding outward violently. It was less like being shot, more like being crushed by space itself. Visual feeds finally captured the attacking warform clearly as it emerged from darkness beyond the prototype's port side. The thing was colossal. Its skeletal frame unfolded around the ship like some ancient abyssal predator studying prey before feeding. Rotating weapon spines glowed deep violet beneath armored plates while clusters of mechanical eyes focused on the Nemesis with horrifying precision. Then the creature did something impossible. Changed shape. Its entire frame reconfigured in seconds, armor rotating inward while new weapon structures emerged from beneath the surface. The warform had adapted specifically for the prototype. Targeting patterns updated. A tactical analyst whispered in disbelief. It's learning our attack behavior. Reyes stared at the display with narrowed eyes. No, she corrected softly. It's learning us. Across the solar system, more hidden human infrastructure activated. Asteroids split apart to reveal concealed missile silos. Cargo freighters unfolded into autonomous drone carriers. Entire moons lit with dormant weapons grids buried beneath their surfaces decades earlier. Humanity had transformed the solar system into a concealed fortress. And for a brief moment, hope surged again. Then the Dominion responded. Not with fear. Not with hesitation. With understanding. Valor had realized something critical about humanity's strategy. Earth was not trying to survive the invasion conventionally. Humanity was trying to psychologically exhaust the Dominion into strategic retreat by creating endless uncertainty. So the Empire changed objectives. No more controlled intimidation. No more measured escalation. The Dominion fleet began targeting civilian population centers directly. Not firing yet. Positioning. Orbital trajectories aligned above Earth's largest cities, while planetary bombardment calculations appeared across every human military network simultaneously. Billions of civilians watched targeting grids lock onto New York, Lagos, Tokyo, Mumbai, Sao Paulo, and hundreds more. A message followed seconds later. Further resistance will result in species-level correction. The room aboard the Nemesis went deathly quiet. For the first time since the invasion began, fear broke through command discipline completely. Because humanity suddenly understood the terrible truth beneath everything the Dominion had shown them. The Empire was not afraid enough yet. And deep inside the prototype ship, Admiral Sophia Reyes finally authorized the release of the one protocol she had sworn would never be used unless extinction itself stood at Earth's doorstep. Project Gravemind. Nobody aboard the Nemesis spoke after the words Project Gravemind appeared across the command displays. Not because they did not recognize the designation. Because they did. And every person cleared to know about it had spent years convincing themselves it would never be activated. Commander Elias Ward stared at the authorization glyph burning crimson above the tactical table while silence spread through the chamber like smoke. Around him, veteran officers who had remained composed through the arrival of 200 Dominion warships now looked visibly shaken. One communications officer actually stepped backward. "You told us it was theoretical," she whispered. Admiral Sophia Reyes did not answer immediately. Outside the armored hull, another warform slammed gravitational fire into the prototype's shields, sending violent tremors through the ship. Entire sections of the tactical chamber flickered under power strain, yet Reyes remained motionless beside the projection table, her expression carrying the exhausted calm of someone approaching the final page of a terrible decision. "It was theoretical," she said quietly, "until the Dominion targeted civilians." Ward felt cold anger rise in his chest. "Then tell me what Gravemind actually is." Reyes enlarged the tactical map of the solar system. Dominion fleets glowed red around Earth while human defense clusters continued collapsing under pressure. Casualty estimates climbed so rapidly that the numbers barely looked real anymore. Then she disabled the battle projections entirely. The room darkened. A new image appeared instead. Ancient Earth. Not modern cities or orbital colonies, but primitive human battlefields stretching across thousands of years. Spears, trenches, burned cities, nuclear fire, endless conflict replaying through recorded history in accelerated flashes. "Every intelligent species develops warfare," Reyes said softly. "But humanity evolved differently from most galactic civilizations in one critical way. The historical projections shifted again. Dominion military doctrine, perfect formation symmetry, predictive combat networks, centralized tactical processing, controlled escalation. The entire empire had built itself around reducing uncertainty. Then the display returned to human history, and chaos exploded across the screen. Reyes looked toward the room. "We never eliminated unpredictability. We survived through it." No one interrupted her, because somewhere beneath the exhaustion and fear, they were beginning to understand. "The Dominion thinks technology creates superiority," Reyes continued. "But technology also creates dependency. The more efficient a civilization becomes, the more it relies on stable systems, stable psychology, stable prediction models." She activated another layer of classified data. Project Gravemind. The files were horrifyingly simple. For 32 years, humanity had not merely studied Dominion weapons or propulsion systems. They had studied cognition itself, decision patterns, threat responses, battlefield assumptions. Humanity's greatest scientists, psychologists, strategists, and behavioral analysts had worked together to build something no sane civilization would ever willingly create. A warfare system designed to weaponize irrationality. Ward's stomach tightened as the implications unfolded. The Nemesis prototype was not the true weapon. It was bait. A giant psychological trigger engineered to force the Dominion into specific adaptive behaviors. Every strange hull design, every asymmetrical weapon system, every unpredictable engagement pattern existed for one reason: to destabilize the Empire's dependence on certainty. The displacement weapon, Ward murmured, was never the point, Reyes replied. The real attack started the moment they began trying to understand us. Across the chamber, realization spread slowly and terribly. The Dominion fleet was not malfunctioning because of direct technological sabotage. It was collapsing because its own predictive infrastructure was being poisoned by human behavioral logic. Human tactical systems intentionally generated contradictory patterns. False retreats mixed with suicidal aggression. Defensive formations disguised offensive intent. Battle algorithms evolved irrationally mid-engagement. Even communication structures aboard the Nemesis were partially randomized beyond conventional optimization. Humanity had spent centuries surviving itself. Now they were exporting that instability into an empire built entirely on control. But that shouldn't be enough, one analyst whispered. Their systems are still superior. Reyes nodded. Which is why Gravemind exists. She finally opened the final authorization layer. Every tactical display aboard the prototype changed instantly. Ward felt his blood run cold. The Dominion fleet was covered in hidden markers. Not ships. Cognitive infection points. For decades, humanity had secretly embedded adaptive behavioral corruption inside nearly every diplomatic interaction with the Empire. Shared translation systems, cultural exchanges, trade simulations, observer briefings, tactical databases intentionally leaked over 30 years. Humanity had not hidden from observation. Humanity had weaponized being observed. The Dominion's predictive warfare AIs had spent decades studying humans under carefully manipulated conditions. Every psychological profile they built carried buried contradictions. Every tactical assumption contained subtle human irrationality encoded beneath layers of apparently harmless data. And now, under battlefield stress, those contradictions were spreading. Ward finally understood why the Empire had reacted with such fear to uncertainty. Their civilization had become too optimized to process chaos safely. Then the first Dominion fleet-wide collapse began. Started small. 3 destroyers misidentified Allied vessels as hostile after predictive targeting systems generated mutually incompatible threat probabilities. Seconds later, nearby cruisers attempted correction maneuvers based on conflicting navigation forecasts. Formation synchronization fractured instantly. Then panic spread through the network. Not emotional panic. Algorithmic panic. Across hundreds of Dominion ships, tactical AIs began generating contradictory engagement models faster than commanders could override them. Defensive systems activated against phantom threats. Weapons locked onto empty space. Entire formations repositioned to counter attacks that did not exist. The Empire's greatest strength had become a cascading vulnerability. Inside the Ascendancy, High Strategist Valor watched his fleet unravel in disbelief. Manual override all predictive systems, he ordered immediately. But the damage was already accelerating. Dominion officers had relied on synchronized combat intelligence for centuries. Most modern commanders no longer processed battlefield conditions independently under large-scale conflict. Their entire doctrine assumed predictive systems would stabilize uncertainty faster than biological cognition could. Now the systems themselves had become infected with human unpredictability. Valor stared at the tactical nightmare unfolding around him. Ships drifting apart. Formation collapse. Friendly targeting conflicts. Entire command chains freezing under contradictory threat analysis. And somewhere inside the chaos, the black human prototype moved calmly through the disorder like a predator inside wounded prey. Archivist Sen looked almost horrified. They didn't build a stronger ship, he whispered. Valor slowly turned toward him. No, the old historian's voice trembled. They built a civilization-level psychological weapon. Then another transmission arrived from the Nemesis. This time it was not directed only at command frequencies. It spread across every Dominion vessel simultaneously. Every screen, every internal network, every battlefield channel. And the message contained only one sentence. You taught us that fear controls civilizations. Pause followed. Then humanity delivered the line that truly shattered the Dominion's confidence. So we taught your machines how to be afraid. The Dominion fleet did not collapse all at once. That was what made it terrifying. If the systems had simply failed, recovery protocols would have activated automatically. The Empire had contingency structures for technical sabotage, cyber infiltration, even rogue AI corruption. Entire military academies existed to prepare commanders for machine instability. But this was different. The predictive systems were still functioning. They were simply no longer trustworthy. Across the battlefield, Dominion officers watched tactical overlays produce mutually contradictory outcomes in real time. One targeting solution identified the Nemesis as vulnerable while another labeled the same attack route catastrophic. Navigation systems flagged Allied formations as collision risk seconds before correcting themselves. Threat assessments shifted constantly between certainty and uncertainty like minds suffering from nervous breakdowns. And because Dominion civilization had relied on predictive synchronization for centuries, commanders no longer knew how much of their own judgment belonged to them. The infection was psychological now. Humanity had crossed that threshold deliberately. Inside the Ascendancy, High Strategist Valor ripped the neural command lattice from the base of his skull with enough force to draw blood. The silver interface cables hit the floor violently while warning alarms erupted around the bridge. Disable all synchronized cognition systems, he ordered. Several officers froze in disbelief. That command alone bordered on heresy. The Dominion's shared tactical architecture was considered the foundation of modern civilization itself. Removing it during active warfare would reduce fleet coordination efficiency by nearly 60%. But Valor understood something the others did not. Efficiency no longer mattered if trust was dead. Manual combat authority is now decentralized, he continued coldly. No predictive relay validation. No synchronized targeting confirmation. Biological command only. The bridge officers obeyed reluctantly while system after system disconnected from the fleet-wide cognition net. One by one, glowing synchronization markers vanished from the tactical displays until the once perfect Dominion battle lattice fractured into isolated islands of independent command. The Empire was amputating its own nervous system to survive. And still the human prototype kept advancing. The Nemesis moved through the battlefield without elegance, its scarred black hull glowing from accumulated damage, while gravitational distortions rippled around the ship like heat bleeding from a furnace. Portions of the outer armor had melted entirely. Entire weapon sections hung partially exposed. One engine array burned unevenly. Yet somehow the vessel looked more dangerous damaged than intact. Like an animal too wounded to fear death anymore. Commander Elias Ward stood beside Admiral Reyes as fresh casualty reports flooded the command chamber. Human defense infrastructure across the outer solar system was collapsing rapidly now that the Dominion had adapted away from synchronized dependency. Without predictive coordination, the Empire became slower but far more aggressive. And aggression was killing humanity. Mars defense rings destroyed. Europa stations gone silent. Civilian casualties climbing into the millions. Even with the Dominion destabilized psychologically, Earth was still losing the physical war. We bought confusion, Ward said grimly. Not victory. Reyes nodded once. I know. Another violent impact shook the ship as one of the warforms slammed directly into the Nemesis shields at close range. The construct had adapted again, abandoning ranged engagement entirely after identifying the prototype's long-distance disruption patterns. Now it fought like a living siege engine. Hull integrity alarms screamed through the chamber, while the warform's claws tore against the shield lattice hard enough to distort the surrounding vacuum itself. Torpedoes ineffective. It's restructuring armor density around impact zones. Starboard shield collapse in 30 seconds. Ward grabbed the tactical rail and stared at the display in disbelief. The warform was learning faster now. Every attack humanity used became less effective within minutes. They're adapting to our unpredictability, he realized. Not exactly, Reyes answered quietly. She enlarged the warform's internal structure. It's adapting to patterns inside our unpredictability. That sentence chilled the room. Because she was right. Even chaos developed tendencies over time. Humanity's irrationality had destabilized the Dominion's perfect systems, but prolonged engagement allowed the Empire to begin categorizing human behavioral variance itself. Slowly, painfully, but inevitably, the psychological weapon was losing efficiency, and the Dominion was beginning to recover. Then the casualty reports from Earth became worse. Much worse. One of the Dominion occupation carriers had breached orbital defense range above South America. Planetary strike platforms unfolded beneath its hull, while city-wide evacuation attempts descended into chaos. Billions watched from emergency broadcasts as targeting arrays slowly aligned over population centers. The Empire was preparing public extermination, not because it needed to, because it wanted humanity to watch hope fail. Inside the command chamber, several officers openly demanded immediate retaliation against the carrier. Others argued for direct assault on the ascendancy itself before the Dominion fully stabilized. Ward looked toward Reyes. She remained terrifyingly calm, almost resigned. That frightened him more than anything else. "You still haven't told them," he said quietly. The room slowly turned toward him. Reyes closed her eyes briefly. "No," she admitted. "Because once I do, there's no going back." Silence settled heavily over the chamber while another section of the prototype lost pressure containment somewhere below deck. Ward stepped forward. "They deserve to know." For several seconds, Reyes said nothing. Then she authorized the final restricted layer of Project Gravemind. The tactical displays changed again. This time, the room stopped breathing entirely. The Nemesis prototype did not possess a conventional reactor. At least not entirely. Buried beneath the ship's primary systems was an experimental singularity collapse engine humanity had never successfully stabilized under full activation conditions. The engine had originally been designed as a theoretical faster-than-light disruption weapon. Not against ships. Against space-time infrastructure itself. If activated beyond containment thresholds, the engine would create a cascading collapse field capable of permanently destabilizing every Dominion jump corridor within dozens of light years. The Empire's interstellar network would fracture instantly. Trade, communication, military reinforcement, everything. The Dominion fleet invading Earth would become stranded permanently. But so would humanity. The room remained frozen as the implications settled in. Activating the engine would not merely end the invasion. It would isolate Earth from the galaxy for generations. Possibly forever. "We built it as a last resort," Reyes said softly. "A species-level deadman switch." Ward stared at the reactor schematics in disbelief. "You were willing to trap humanity in the solar system indefinitely?" Reyes met his eyes without hesitation. "I was willing to make sure we survived." Before anyone could respond, a new alert exploded across the chamber. The Dominion carrier above Earth had begun orbital descent. Planetary bombardment countdown initiated. Estimated civilian casualties, 100 million within the first strike cycle. The room erupted instantly. Officers shouting, tactical revisions, emergency intercept proposals. And through all of it, the Singularity engine glowed silently beneath the projection floor like the heartbeat of an impossible choice. Then the warform outside the hull finally breached the Nemesis shields completely. And for the first time since the invasion began, the prototype itself started bleeding atmosphere into space. The moment the Nemesis lost its shields, the Dominion fleet attacked like starving predators sensing blood in the water. For hours the prototype had seemed untouchable, slipping through impossible firing solutions while poisoning the Empire's confidence from within. But now the illusion shattered all at once. Coherent particle lances carved across the black hull. Gravitational shockwaves tore entire armor plates free. One of the external weapon rings detonated in silence against the stars, scattering molten debris across nearby space. Inside the ship, emergency bulkheads slammed shut section by section while atmosphere vented violently through ruptured corridors. Human crew members were dying now. Not abstract casualty numbers on tactical screens. Real people, burning, suffocating, being crushed between collapsing steel. Commander Elias Ward staggered against a console as another impact hit hard enough to dim the entire command chamber. Smoke rolled from overloaded systems while warning sirens merged into one continuous mechanical scream. Deck 12 gone. Main reactor containment dropping. We lost navigation stabilization. Across the room, younger officers who had entered the battle believing they were part of humanity's unstoppable answer were finally seeing the truth. The Nemesis was not invincible. It was simply dangerous enough to terrify a civilization that had forgotten how fear felt. And terrifying something stronger than you was not the same as defeating it. Outside the shattered shield perimeter, the warforms closed inward around the prototype like hunting beasts. Their movements had become sharper now that Dominion command systems were partially stabilized under biological-only coordination. No more hesitation. No more algorithmic paralysis. The Empire had adapted again. And adaptation was slowly killing humanity. On Earth, panic spread beyond containment. The Dominion carrier descending over South America darkened entire coastlines beneath its shadow, while orbital strike arrays unfolded from beneath the vessel like metallic cathedrals of extinction. Emergency broadcasts no longer tried to calm civilians. Governments openly admitted they could not stop what was coming. Millions fled cities knowing escape was impossible. Billions watched the skies waiting for the first strike. Yet even now, something strange continued happening across human networks. Nobody surrendered. Not one global government transmitted capitulation. Not one military command attempted negotiation. Humanity was terrified, but humanity was still resisting. That fact confused the Dominion almost as much as the prototype itself. Inside the Ascendancy, High Strategist Valor studied battlefield projections with growing unease. The tactical situation was finally shifting back toward Dominion advantage. Human infrastructure losses were accelerating. The Nemesis was critically damaged. Planetary suppression would begin within minutes. By every rational measure, victory was returning. So why did it still feel wrong? Because they haven't used it yet, Archivist Sen whispered beside him. Valor looked sharply toward the old historian. Sen's eyes remained fixed on the prototype. They built 32 years of strategy around unpredictability, he said quietly. You don't construct something like that without a final layer. Valor felt cold realization tighten through his body. The humans were still holding something back. Then the battlefield changed again. The Nemesis stopped retreating. For the first time since its shields collapsed, the black warship ceased all evasive maneuvers entirely and accelerated directly toward the center of the Dominion formation. Straight toward the Ascendancy. Dominion tactical officers reacted instantly, flooding the prototype with concentrated fire from every nearby vessel. The human ship should have disintegrated under the assault. Instead it kept coming. Armor tore away in burning chunks. Entire sections of the hull ruptured. One engine array exploded completely. Still the Nemesis advanced. And suddenly every Dominion officer watching realized the horrifying truth simultaneously. The humans no longer cared if the prototype survived. Inside the command chamber, emergency lighting painted the surviving crew blood red, while Admiral Reyes stood motionless before the reactor controls. Distance to central formation? 8,000 kilometers. Singularity engine status? Pause followed. Then Chief Engineer Volkov answered with terrifying calm. Cascade ignition available. The room fell silent. Ward stared at Reyes in disbelief. If we trigger the collapse field here, we sever Dominion corridor infrastructure across the entire sector, Reyes finished. And us with it. Another impact tore through the rear compartments hard enough to throw several officers to the floor. Ward forced himself upright again. There has to be another option. Reyes finally looked at him fully. For the first time since the invasion began, she looked tired instead of composed. I spent 32 years searching for one. That answer hit harder than the alarms. Because beneath all the secrecy, all the manipulation, all the terrifying contingency plans, Reyes had never actually believed humanity could overpower the Dominion conventionally. The prototype was never built to win. It was built to make invasion too expensive to survive politically. And now the final price was about to be paid. Across the battlefield, Dominion formations scrambled desperately as the Nemesis drove itself deeper into the center of the fleet. Warforms intercepted aggressively, slamming against the damaged hull, while concentrated weapons fire burned glowing trenches across the ship's surface. Still it advanced, like a wounded predator dragging itself toward the throat of something larger. Then the prototype transmitted again. Not to military frequencies, to everyone, every human shelter, every Dominion vessel, every civilian network across the occupied systems. The voice that emerged belonged to neither Reyes nor Ward. It belonged to an ordinary crew member, young, exhausted, terrified, and completely resolute. We know you think this is about survival. The message echoed through the stars. It isn't. Visual feeds activated across the galaxy showing human crew members still holding failing compartments together manually while fire spread around them. Engineers remained at stations knowing reactor exposure would kill them within minutes. Pilots continued steering through impossible damage while Dominion weapons carved the ship apart. Humanity was no longer broadcasting strength. Humanity was broadcasting willingness. We were never the strongest species, the voice continued. We were never the oldest. We were never the most advanced. Another explosion tore through the prototype, yet the transmission continued uninterrupted. But we survived something none of you ever had to survive. Dominion officers across the fleet listened despite themselves. So understand this before you decide what happens next. The Nemesis entered the dead center of the Imperial formation. Singularity warnings erupted across every Dominion vessel simultaneously. And then the human voice delivered the sentence that finally made even the Empire afraid. We survived ourselves. Inside the Ascendancy, Vaylor's blood went cold. Because in that instant, he finally understood what made humanity truly dangerous. Not their weapons. Not their tactics. Not even their unpredictability. Humanity had evolved on a world where their greatest predator had always been humanity itself. And any species capable of surviving that for thousands of years was capable of something the Dominion had never fully understood until now. Mutual destruction did not frighten humans the way it frightened everyone else. Sometimes, if cornered badly enough, humans were willing to drag the universe into the fire with them. The Singularity engine began to wake beneath the Nemesis like the heartbeat of a dying god. Across the Dominion fleet, every sensor array erupted with catastrophic warnings simultaneously. Space itself around the prototype started bending inward, stars distorting across tactical displays, while gravitational tides rolled outward through the battlefield in invisible waves. Entire warships drifted off alignment as navigation systems struggled to compensate for local reality fluctuations. And for the first time in recorded Dominion history, fleet-wide panic spread openly. Not confusion, not uncertainty, panic, because every officer understood exactly what the readings meant. The humans were about to collapse the corridor network. If the engine reached full ignition, the Sovereign Dominion would lose interstellar continuity across dozens of sectors instantly. Trade routes would die. Reinforcement pathways would vanish. Entire civilizations dependent on synchronized transport infrastructure would become isolated worlds overnight. The Empire would survive eventually, but it would fracture first. And all of it because one species refused to kneel. Inside the Ascendancy, High Strategist Vaylor stood frozen before the tactical projection while emergency calculations cascaded across the chamber around him. Every simulation produced the same outcome now. There was no victory left. Continue the attack and the collapse field activated. Retreat and humanity survived undefeated. The Dominion had entered the solar system believing Earth was a developing species that needed correction. Now the most powerful empire in known space was being forced to negotiate with extinction mathematics. "Signal all formations," Vaylor ordered quietly. No one moved. Several officers simply stared at him. He repeated the command louder. "Signal all formations. Immediate disengagement from planetary strike operations." One tactical commander looked horrified. "Strategist, if we withdraw now, we survive." The officer fell silent, because that single word contained the entire truth. Vaylor looked toward the burning image of the Nemesis suspended inside the center of the fleet like a black wound carved into reality itself. Portions of the hull were melting apart now. Entire sections of the ship had gone dark. Human casualties aboard the prototype had exceeded 70%. And still they were willing to activate the engine. That was the realization the Dominion could not process fully. The humans were not bluffing. Across Earth, billions watched the impossible unfold live. Dominion bombardment carriers halted their descent. Planet-killer arrays powered down one by one. Warforms withdrew from attack vectors. Then, slowly, almost reluctantly, the vast Imperial fleet began pulling away from Earth. Human shelters fell silent. Military command centers froze. Nobody celebrated at first because nobody understood what they were seeing. The Empire was retreating. Not because humanity had overpowered them. Because humanity had convinced them the cost of victory was too horrifying to risk. Inside the Nemesis, Commander Elias Ward stared at the tactical displays as Dominion formations disengaged across the solar system. "They're falling back," he whispered. Around him, surviving crew members looked almost unable to believe it. After everything, after the deaths, after the impossible sacrifices, the Empire was actually retreating. Ward turned toward Admiral Reyes. "We did it." But Reyes was not looking at the fleet. She was staring at the Singularity ignition sequence still counting upward beneath the tactical overlays. 43 seconds until irreversible cascade. Damage across the ship had destabilized shutdown synchronization. The engine no longer wanted to stop. For the first time since the invasion began, fear crossed her face openly. "Volkov," she said sharply. "Abort sequence manually." The chief engineer's expression darkened instantly. "We may not be able to." The room went silent again. Outside the ship, the Dominion fleet continued retreating while the Nemesis itself became the most dangerous object in the solar system. Humanity had won the war. Now they might accidentally destroy the galaxy anyway. Deep below the command chamber, surviving engineers crawled through collapsing reactor corridors flooded with radiation and molten coolant, while the Singularity core destabilized harder every second. Emergency drones failed almost immediately under gravitational distortion. Entire containment systems folded inward like crushed paper. And still the engineers kept moving. Because that was humanity too. Not just defiance. Not just rage. The willingness to crawl directly into hell with bare hands if it meant fixing one impossible thing for a few more seconds. Naomi Volkov reached the reactor chamber half-blind from blood loss and radiation exposure. The Singularity core floated inside fractured containment rings like a miniature artificial star collapsing into itself. She understood immediately what had to happen. And she also understood she would not survive doing it. Her final transmission reached the bridge through static. "Tell Earth," she said weakly, "that surviving was worth it." Then she shut the channel. For 14 seconds, nobody aboard the Nemesis spoke while Volkov manually rewired collapsing containment systems from inside the chamber itself. Outside, the Dominion fleet continued retreating. Across Earth, billions watched the damaged prototype drifting among burning debris fields. And then the Singularity countdown stopped. The solar system fell quiet. Not peaceful quiet. Exhausted quiet. The kind that follows catastrophe barely avoided. On the bridge of the Ascendancy, Vaylor watched the surviving human vessel slowly stabilize against every probability model that should have killed it already. He realized then that the Dominion had misunderstood humanity from the very beginning. They had believed humans were dangerous because they innovated aggressively. That was wrong. Humanity was dangerous because it adapted emotionally faster than any species the Dominion had ever encountered. Fear hardened them instead of controlling them. Pressure unified them instead of breaking them. Even now, after suffering devastation that would politically collapse most civilizations, Earth had not fragmented. It had become more certain. Archivist's son spoke softly beside him. They are not a stable species. Valor kept watching the prototype. No, he replied quietly. But they are a surviving one. 3 days later, leaked Dominion military records spread across the galaxy faster than censorship could contain them. The reports revealed casualty numbers, tactical failures, and one classified conclusion repeated across multiple command analyses. Humanity had not won because of superior technology. Humanity had won because the Dominion depended on order while humans had evolved inside permanent chaos. Across observer civilizations trapped beneath Dominion control, something dangerous awakened after reading those reports. Hope. And on Earth, beneath the shattered Arctic ice where the Nemesis prototype was finally returning home, workers gathered silently around the massive black hull as it descended into the frozen dock one final time. The ship looked broken now, burned, scarred, half-dead, but undefeated. Commander Elias Ward stood beside the docking platform watching emergency crews move around the vessel while dawn slowly rose over the Arctic horizon. Around him, exhausted survivors embraced quietly beneath pale sunlight reflecting across cracked ice fields. Humanity had nearly destroyed itself to stay free, and somehow, impossibly, it had worked. Then Ward noticed something strange near the far side of the dock. A new construction platform had already begun rising from beneath the ice. Larger than the Nemesis, much larger, and across the unfinished black hull, one fresh designation had already been painted in stark white letters. Earthfall, Class 2.